we followed Dahlia's lead, and Dahlia was not gonna let this stop her. She still wanted to go out and play and be silly and be feisty and be a kid. She did not want her whole world to be about this disease.
Right.
And so we kind of followed that lead and we were like, all right, then that's what we're doing,
Yeah.
and we did, and we persevered and we created a lot of beauty.
Hello, my friends. I'm so happy to be with you today. I just love our time together. And I love that I get to talk to parents who want to be a safe landing for other parents who are going through something that's difficult. And today's episode is a conversation that I got to have with Jessica Fein. She is a mom whose daughter was eventually diagnosed with MERF syndrome. That's a mitochondrial disease, and it's an acronym that stands for myoclonic epilepsy with ragged red fibers. And Jessica explains this by saying that mitochondria are the powerhouse of the body's cells. So when your mitochondria aren't working properly, your organs can become weaker and stop functioning. Jessica shares what it was like in those early years and those milestones, and things just weren't quite adding up, and she wasn't totally getting the answers that she needed. Tests would come back inconclusive, and then she would go more, and they would still be inconclusive, and she just felt like nobody could give her answers. And she opens up and about the emotional toll that weighs on you when you can't find the thing that's happening with your child, when in your gut, you know something is going on. So then she goes on to explain what it was like after actually navigating multiple health systems and getting a diagnosis that finally helped explain everything. But I think the misconception there is that once you get a diagnosis, we all know that does not mean you have a clear treatment or plan and say, yep, now we know exactly how to help. Sometimes it can be even more confusing once you have an answer, but it does open you up to knowing what to search for, finding other community people who have gone through something similar before. And that's exactly why Jessica is here today. Please, please share this episode with anyone who has a child with complex medical needs and maybe navigating the world of rare disease. Jessica's conversation highlights the importance of advocacy, persistence, and trusting your gut as a parent, especially when it feels like you're the only one connecting the dots. Please share this episode. Let's go ahead and jump in. Hey friends, welcome to Child Life On Call. My name is Katie Taylor. I am a mom and I'm a child life specialist. If you're listening to the podcast today for the first time, welcome, and we want you to know that the conversations we have here are designed for parents whose child has received a medical diagnosis. I know it may feel extremely terrifying and world-changing even, but you're here now, and you're about to hear from another parent who has had the same feelings that you do right now, and they're still standing. They had the courage to come here and share what it was like for them, to hopefully make it a little bit easier for you. I'm so grateful to each and every guest and each and every listener who shows up here, and it's my privilege to host this sacred space. Jessica Fein, thank you so much for joining us on Child Life On Call. I am so excited to meet you. I feel like you're a wordsmith. I've been reading your articles, and I just feel like you have so much important perspectives and gifts through your words to share with others.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for your kind words and for having me on your show. I am a writer, as you point out, who has written quite a bit about my very complicated family journey. I am mom to three. My middle daughter, Dahlia, died in 2022, a week after her 17th birthday from MERF syndrome, which is myoclonic epilepsy, ragged red fibers, an ultra rare mitochondrial disease. And really, I spent a lot of time speaking about and writing about not only how we can come to terms with things that seem so unimaginable, like that we're not even able in our wildest dreams to imagine certain things that end up happening to us, which is probably a good thing because we'd go a little bit bonkers if we sat
That's
around
true.
imagining all of these horrors, but really how we are capable of so much more than we think and how we can learn to incorporate and how important it is to incorporate joy and beauty and meaning alongside the challenges that so many of us are dealt.
Mm.
And so that's another big focus for me. And then I also now am, in the grief space. And even before my daughter died and so many of the other losses that I've had, in terms of deaths, there are so many losses that come with the rare disease diagnosis and so much grief that goes along with that. So those are kind of the main areas that I've been focusing on.
Hmm. I would love to come back after we kind of learn a little bit more about the beginning of your journey in becoming a medical parent, but maybe the way that grief feels similar and different as you've gone throughout Dahlia's life. Now that
Sure.
she has died after, what that grief feels like versus what it felt like before. I'd love to learn about that. Can you take
Absolutely.
us back to some of those beginning moments? I know she was diagnosed around 5 years old.
Yeah.
Is that
So
correct?
that is right. That's right. My husband and I adopted Dahlia from Guatemala and brought her home when she was 6 months. And we had actually met the birth mother a couple of times. We know in retrospect that Dahlia would have inherited this disease from her birth mother. We also are reasonably certain that her birth mother was not aware she had it. It
Mm,
can be difficult to diagnose even in places where there's more access to skilled medical care. So, in any event, we pretty early on, like so many parents, thought something might be off and were told, no, no, she'll catch up, give it time. I hear this from so many parents, and then we
mhm,
go on this diagnostic odyssey. For us, it was really about getting that initial workup because I had early intervention come to the house 3 times, and 3 times we were told, "Oh, no, no, she's fine," and the doctors kept saying she was fine. We didn't know what her prenatal care was like. We didn't know what those first 6 months were like, and so we really were kind of patted on the hand a little bit, and again, I know that this is not uncommon for many people who are listening. Finally, we did get a hearing test because some of Dahlia's symptoms were that she had garbled speech and her gait was wobbly. And that hearing test did uncover that she had mild to moderate hearing loss.
okay.
And then things moved quickly because there was no explanation for why she would have the hearing loss. We were recommended for genetic testing really quickly. And at least at that time, that didn't usually happen. It was quite a fight for people to get that genetic testing. And the genetic testing right away surfaced a diagnosis of MERF syndrome. That's when the real questions started, I have to say, because we had no idea what MERF syndrome was. I mean, we didn't even know what mitochondria were, right? So and with a rare disease and with a degenerative disease, there's way more questions than there are answers. And it was a long journey of continuing to recalibrate what our life looked like as we worked to give our kids some semblance of a childhood in the midst of this insidious disease.
Mm. Can you elaborate on that kind of beginning diagnosis? You put it so perfectly. It's like now that you had an answer, there were even more questions, right? It's like
Yeah.
now we finally, we had hoped that we would learn something. Oh, but now it's just the beginning of a whole other set of questions.
Right, and we all assume if you get a diagnosis, then you'll get the treatment, right? "Oh,
With
no,
rare
well, we don't
disease.
really know very much about it, and, there's not much research being done, and no, we've never really treated somebody with it before, but I've read about it," and then, of course, what happens is the parents become the experts, right? And
Yep.
that's
Hmm.
such a weird role reversal, and it doesn't take long
Yeah.
before the parents know so much more than any of the most of the doctors. I mean, for us, it was when Dahlia was 9 that she got very sick, diagnosis at 5, and got quite sick at 9, and at that point, we were on a vacation in Florida, and we were in a hospital without a metabolic specialist where nobody knew what MERF syndrome was, where literally we were like, doctors and nurses would come in and be like, "So I just Googled it." And we're like,
Yeah.
"Oh god." Because you wanna at least feel like they're experts and you're not them. Like, you don't wanna be
Right.
the expert. You want the person
Right.
who knows so
And
much
you
more.
want to be the parent.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Did you have feelings of isolation or wanting a community or to reach out to another parent right at the beginning? Like what was your first instinct and how you saw you're
Yeah.
coping with it, whether it was positive or negative coping?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I have a podcast as well called I Don't Know How You Do It, and I talk to a lot of parents whose children have medical complexity or rare disease, et cetera, and I know that community is such a critical tool in the toolbox. For me, it wasn't really something that I looked for initially. I was more dependent on my pre-existing community
Mm,
who had no clue what I was going through, and that's a problem. We can get to that. But I
yeah.
just didn't even have the bandwidth to be like, "Oh, I'm gonna try and find somebody else who has this." Like, that wasn't part of my coping strategy, and perhaps things would have been better if I had,
Mm,
maybe, looking back, I know so many fabulous families in the rare disease community now, and I'm like, "Oh, where were you? I wish I had known you then," you know?
yeah.
But we were kinda tunnel vision because we had a lot going on, and my husband and I worked full time, and we had the 3 kids, and we were dealing with this disease, and we were dealing with some learning issues with another kid. So it was like, oh my god, like, we were just keeping our head, like, this much above water.
For sure, for sure. What were some of the ways you did find yourself coping with caring for Dahlia, also having 2 other kids?
Yeah, I think, for me, it was really important that I kept working.
Mm,
And that was something that I did face a lot of judgment because, when Dahlia ultimately, so at 9, just to kind of get everybody on the same page, she got pneumonia and she ended up with a trach. So at that point, she became ventilator dependent. And for the next 8 years, she was vent dependent and she couldn't speak or eat or walk at all. Ultimately, she lost her ability to move completely for the last 2 years. And we had a lot of nursing and personal care attendants and machine suppliers and people in the house all the time. So it was a very busy thoroughfare. There were always a lot of people around, which might be one of the reasons why I was like, in
yeah.
my
You're
moments,
like,
I
"I
was
have
like,
enough."
yeah, I was like, just give me some alone time. So in any event, I did keep working. And for me, that was really important to continue to have a piece of my identity that was not mother, therapist, caregiver, nurse, organizer, all these other
Yeah,
things that we become, right? I
right.
mean, we end up wearing so many hats. And I had no idea what I was doing. None of us do, right? I mean, you learn, but my job, I knew what I was doing. I had been doing that forever. I knew how to do that and having that time out each day. And by the way, Dahlia was in school. So it's not like Dahlia was at home and I was like, see ya, which I may have done if she was in solid care anyway. I mean, I don't know. That wasn't the situation though. She was going with her own private nurse to school every day and I'd go to work and that allowed me to keep a sense of my own identity and that was very
Mm,
very important for me. It also prevented maybe a little bit of burnout that would have happened if I had been home full time. So that was an important thing for me. My husband
oh,
and I were terrific teammates throughout this whole
mm,
thing, and I feel really, really fortunate for that. We had really different skill sets. He was actually a better hands-on medical provider for our
mm.
girl. And I gotta say, everybody was always surprised by that. People will be like, "Oh, dad. Oh,"
Yeah,
everybody loved him because they were not used to seeing the dad who was so hands-on, and I was really organized, like, all the stuff that needed to happen and the equipment and the machinery and the medicine and the nursing and that was my forte. I had been in corporate. I knew how to do that, it was like I drew on
right.
those skills. And so that was another thing that was really important. And then I would say, we followed Dahlia's lead, and Dahlia was not gonna let this stop her. She still wanted to go out and play and be silly and be feisty and be a kid. She did not want her whole world to be about this disease.
Right.
And so we kind of followed that lead and we were like, all right, then that's what we're doing,
Yeah.
and we did, and we persevered and we created a lot of beauty in the midst of the ugliness.
One of my favorite things that you have written about Dahlia is that there are a lot of rare things about her, and her rare disease is the least rare thing,
Oh, yes,
and
I
and
forgot that I
that
wrote that. I like
and
that.
you're like, "I need to bring that back." It, like, so integrates with what you're saying about her personality. So
Yes,
tell us
yeah.
a little bit about, like, what made her shine and,
Oh, I love
even
that.
given her, disability, being unable to talk, you
Yeah.
know what she's thinking and feeling, so tell us about her.
Exactly, and, I love that, and I love talking about Dahlia, and one of the things that, we experience in grief is that people don't wanna bring up our people that have died, and
Yeah,
so I love the opportunity, and I love the question. People feel like, "Oh, well, I don't wanna mention," I don't wanna remind you as though we've forgotten, and so we don't
right.
get the chance to talk about our people. I mean, I do because I wrote a whole book about it, but,
Yeah.
Dahlia, first of all, was like an old soul,
Mm,
and I never really totally knew what that meant, but everybody said she's an old soul, and I was like, "I kinda love that." Like, there was just something where you felt like she was looking really deeply into,
Yeah.
into who you were. She was also at the same time silly and feisty. Those two things don't necessarily go together. And just the sweetest, sweetest person. When I would come home from work, she would rub my back. She was just such a sweetheart and also mischievous. I mean, like, for example, many of your listeners are probably familiar with the, saline bullets. In our case, we used them to, moisturize the trach, etc. Anyway, they're for people who don't know, these little kind of pink plastic things filled with saline, right?
Yeah.
And she would just go up and like squirt her siblings with it, and like just, or if we, you as a medical parent, you're constantly making little hiccups, like sometimes, when you put the syringe in, it'll splish out and, whatever the things are. She just thought that was the funniest thing in the world. She was
Yeah.
just cracking up, so she was so playful,
Oh,
and yeah, and she exuded love, right? And it was so interesting to watch because what happens is when you put something out, I mean, I believe when whatever energy you put out into the world, you typically get back. She put out so much sweetness and kindness and energy, beautiful energy and love. People reflected that right back to her, And
yeah.
so watching the whole thing happen, it's amazing to me the impact she had on so many people I didn't even know. People will say, "Oh, when she was 4, I was her speech therapist for a week," whatever it was,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think about her all the time, and I'm like, "Whoa," I mean, this is a person who in 17 years really made a huge impact on everybody whose path she crossed.
Wow. And you can see it. You sent me over a few pictures, and there's one of the two of you, and you can truly see not just her love, but the love you have for each other, which is just so wonderful. From what I've noticed from kind of your articles, you wrote your book, writing has been, I don't know if it's been a therapeutic exercise, if it's what you do in the corporate world, but what has the process of sitting down to put your thoughts out there been like for you?
For me, I have really found it to be a balm, and I will say, I think creativity in general, and I write a lot
Mm.
about grief. I do a column in Psychology Today, and it's a whole article about what I think creativity can do for us when we're grieving or going through hard times, and for me, my creativity is expressed through writing. So, I think that things were so chaotic, and being able to kind of take control of the narrative by writing it through my lens
Mhm.
was really useful. And I will say this book was written during Dahlia's lifetime. I think the important thing to know is this is not a book at all about Dahlia's death. The book was agented and off to the publisher during Dahlia's lifetime. It's very much about Dahlia's life.
Mm.
She did die before the book came out, and there is an ending now. I mean, it's not a big spoiler,
Mm.
that's what
Yeah.
happened, but that's not this story. And so for me, and I wrote most of it at Dahlia's bedside, to be able to capture the essence of her, and then also my journey. And I'm very clear that this is my story and my version.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of loss. I've lost 2 siblings, and I've lost my parents, and of course, as we're talking about, my daughter. I will say that when my first sister died, my father was a writer, and he wrote a memoir about his loss. And he gave it to me the first time, the manuscript, and he said, "I've written a book about Nomi." That was my sister. And I read it and I said, "This isn't a book about Nomi. This is a book about you. This is, if
Mm.
I were going to write a book about Nomi, it would be totally different." Right. And so I think that that's really was very important for me. This is my story. This is my transformation. Dahlia is the main character in a way, right? But
Sure.
it's my story. And I say that because if my husband, who is a gorgeous writer, were to write a book about Dahlia, it'd be a totally different story,
Yeah.
And so this for me was really also about how we can have so many losses, how we can move through those and move on together with our losses. I don't think there's something that we get over. I don't want to get over my people, but it's how do we
Mm.
integrate them as we move forward.
Writing is such a powerful exercise. I just recently started journaling at the end of last year. So kind of started like a guided journaling process called the Artist's Way. And
Oh, yes, of course. Artist.
it was just the most beautiful entrance into journaling. I've never done it before. And I think one of the misconceptions I had about writing was the energy it would take for me. Oh my God, I have to sit here and use, and sure, there was a learning curve in like my
Yeah.
hand and like going through pens, but
Right.
it was so rejuvenating
Yeah.
and introspective that I just urge anyone read Jessica's book and consider writing your own story for yourself. It's so easy for parents and caregivers to feel lost as you're devoting your life to caring for someone else. And this is a way you get to come back to you.
This is a way you get to come back to you. I love the way you put that. I agree. And I feel like also sharing our stories is so important because even as we were going through it, I knew that two things were true. One, this was an utterly unique story. And two, it was totally universal. And I
Mm,
feel like both of those things were true. And so I wanted to share what it was like. I mean, look, we all want the best for our kids. We all want to be able to quote unquote fix things, kiss their boo boo and make it better. We all are faced with the fact that at the end we don't have control. Right. And so there's so much that, I've had a lot of people say, well, I don't have a child with any kind of illness, but I was able to relate, whatever,
yeah,
we all go through stuff as parents. But then I think within the medical community, it's so important to share our story so that as the person said to you when you started your
yeah,
podcast, please tell me there's somebody else. Once you start to peel back the layers and see there are a lot of somebody else's. There are so many of us going through this, and we can get strength from that because it is so isolating and you feel like, "Oh my god, surely nobody else in the world. I mean, only 6 other people have this disease. Nobody can relate to what I'm going through." But it doesn't matter what the actual disease is. It's
agreed.
irrelevant. We're all
Yeah.
going through the same thing.
Like I mentioned to you, we have hundreds of different diagnoses shared on this podcast, and the universal experience, as you're saying, is so common throughout. Given your really, vast and extensive hospital experience, having a child who is trached and vented, what are some of the tips and tricks you've picked up that other parents could possibly implement the next time they're in the hospital with their child? And also, I'm listening as a child life specialist to be like, what can I tell other parents to try or do
Yes.
and encourage other clinicians to get parents to try and do?
Okay, well, first of all, let's just be really practical. One of my friends brought us a really cozy comforters and pillows. Okay, we're starting as the most
Yeah.
practical.
Hmm.
So for more than 3 months, my husband and I alternated each night which one of us spent the night there. Having our own bedding was so huge. This is like, okay, if you are visiting anybody,
Yeah.
first of all, make sure that they're set with the bedding. Also, people are like, well, what can I bring? Whatever. I loved anything cozy, cozy socks, right? That's
Mm,
such a good thing to bring.
yes.
Also, one of the weirdest things about an extended stay in the hospital is it's so boring. People don't think about this, right? They think like, "Oh my god, you're in the hospital, the drama," and of course there's drama.
Right.
But most of the time, there's no drama, and you don't want the drama. You want the boredom, right? Because that means
Right.
there's no drama, and the drama is not typically good.
No.
Which means that, we watched Rio that was a while ago. We watched Rio 3 times a day, every day for 3 months. I've seen that movie, I swear to you, 100 times. So, when people would bring little projects that we could do, whether it was like books on tape, whether it was little art projects,
Yeah.
anything we could do,
Yeah.
that was really, really valuable. The child life specialists, they're the heroes in the whole situation. We waited so eagerly for those visits. It was so brilliant what they were able to do. There was a guy who would come, the music guy, and he would
Yeah.
figure out how to instruments and Dahlia could play along. And okay, so all of that kind of stuff is great. Also, there was only one person, 3 months, one person who came with really healthy, nourishing food for me. So
Mm,
remember, you're spending most of the time eating the hospital cafeteria food.
right.
And when people come, if they were to bring food, mostly it would be like chocolates. And I'm a huge chocoholic, so there's nothing wrong with bringing chocolates, but you start to feel pretty grotesque because
Yeah.
you're living in the hospital. And so I was so grateful when somebody brought healthy things, you
Mm,
know? I was so moved by the people who showed up. And I think that there were a lot of people who were scared off by it, and some really close friends who either didn't come at all or maybe came once. And there were other people who showed up multiple times a week. And it
Oh,
doesn't have to be a long visit. What it does is it reminds you that there is a world still happening and that you are part of it and that people know that and that people are acknowledging it and just coming. And just one friend came and without, saying anything, just started to tidy up like my little corner of the room, because I mean, it was
yeah,
just like, talk
sure.
about it was just a message, just made herself useful without asking, "What can I do?" A lot of people, this is another thing. I you're gonna be sorry you asked because I could go on for like
No, this is amazing. It's such good reminders.
but, a big thing we all say is, "Please, please let me know if there's any way I can be helpful." Well, okay, there is enough going on where that person does not need to figure out how you can be helpful.
No.
So I think really practical things. You don't have to be the one who's showing up in the hospital with the healthy food and the art projects and tidying. You can
Yeah.
also, if there is a family at home, take care of that family. I'll never forget my boss at the time brought to my family at home a huge tray of mac and cheese and brownies and all this stuff because remember, you're like focus is so on the child who's in the hospital, and there's these other kids some of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
What can you do for them? A lot of people are more comfortable with that, and that's fine, right?
Yeah. That's still
Another friend
helpful.
yes, a friend took my other 2 kids for the weekend on this, like, fabulous adventurous weekend, and what that did was it allowed me and my husband to be together
Oh,
in our
huge.
daughters otherwise, we were literally for over 3 months trading off.
Yeah.
Every single day, it's like high five in the hallway when you pass each other, but somebody's gotta be home with the other kids, right?
Yeah.
So doing that, giving the other kids a little bit of fun, that was
Right.
huge.
Mm. That's such good advice. Because you don't always have the bandwidth you love and care for all of your children no matter what, but you have to pay such close attention to vital signs, to nurses coming in and out, when the doctors are coming, that this like the brain capacity to handle much more, it's non-existent. So
Yeah.
when you have those people and Effie from Once Upon a Gene just had the most hilarious Instagram reel. She was like, "Do you want to help mow my lawn? Okay. Do you want to
Oh
help
my god,
fold
Effie
my
so first of all,
laundry?"
Effie is a good friend of mine, and she was, the first guest I ever had on my podcast, and she's also interviewed me on hers and on mine. She's the best. But
Yeah.
I love that. If you wanna help mow my lawn, I say, if you have the bandwidth as the parent, a thing you could do because people wanna be helpful, they just don't know what to do. Make a list. Put
Mhm.
it in a put, s put it in some kinda shared drive, and then people can
Yeah.
just see, "Oh, they need this," and check it off,
I
right?
love that. Google Drive is so easy.
Yes.
Just make a Google document, put it public, and put what you need on there and let people check it off.
And I will say, for the parents who are listening and being like, "Oh my god, that feels so presumptuous. I don't know, I'm not comfortable." You are giving people a gift when you do that. You
You
are
are.
giving them a way to be useful, and that is what people want.
Jessica, did you know when you started writing your story at Dahlia's bedside that it would be something that you published one day?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Mhm.
I did. I started off by saying I'm writing a book. I didn't
Yeah.
even start with like, I'm gonna journal. So, I was like, I'm writing a book.
I love
And
it.
I did, Now I will say I had written a book in my 20s, which was a long time ago, but I had
Yeah.
had an experience of writing a book and having it published, so and I, come from a bit of a family of writers, so it wasn't like the craziest thing in the world to say. It
Yeah.
wasn't as crazy as if I said I'm going to run a marathon, then people would have been like, "You're doing what?" But I'm like, "I'm writing a book." They're like, "Okay."
Oh, that's another thing we should do is gyms in the hospital for parents to be able to go walk on a treadmill for
Right?
a bit,
There
right?
should be gyms. I mean, I also kind of think it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if there was a cocktail bar, but maybe that would, I don't
I get it.
know.
And what kind of cocktails are we talking? Because there's a lot of substances at hospitals. It's
Yes,
another podcast, another thing.
another I'm there for that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, that's our different it's rated differently than this one. Jessica, I wanna end number 1, I wanna hear how people can get to your book, but I wanna go back to kind of my question at the beginning about that grief is painful. It's painful when your child is alive. and you're grieving what could have been, what's changed, and it's painful when your child dies. What has it felt like to you, and how has your grief evolved?
Yeah, and I'm really so glad that you talk about the grief that we experience when the child is alive, because I will tell you that for a really long time, I felt like I'm not grieving my daughter while my daughter is alive. I
Yeah.
wasn't well versed, as most of us aren't, in grief. And I didn't understand that there is an actual real thing called ambiguous grief. We all know about anticipatory grief, but ambiguous grief, right? And in fact, what happened was I was asked to speak on a panel about it. And I was like, of course I'll speak. I was always about raising awareness. But then I had to Google what's ambiguous grief.
Mm,
And when I discovered that we can grieve for a person who's still with us, but with us in a different way, right? Whether that means that they're alive but not with us physically because maybe they're a prisoner of war, or maybe it means that they're suffering from dementia. So they're with us, but not in the way that they used to be. And when we can name what it is we're going through, it takes away some of the power. There's so much to grieve when your child has a diagnosis, like many of your guests and your listeners. There's so much to grieve, and it's okay. Like, you shouldn't feel
yeah.
guilty about that. I think sometimes we do a number on ourselves, like, I can't grieve. Look what everything my daughter's going through,
Right.
and it's okay. And it's important to name it. I think that that kind of grief is so much murkier. People don't know exactly what's happening. They don't know how to support you. Now, I don't think they know how to support us well in grief that comes after death either,
Yeah,
but it's better. But we have a long way to go as a society
we
on
do.
that front as well. We really do. We are very much grief illiterate. And so the grief was different because I was also with her, and every moment was so precious. That's not to say that every moment was lovely. There were a lot of really horrible, terrible
Yeah.
moments, but they were precious. And I knew that. Grief afterwards, there is an expectation that you will get over it. I mentioned this earlier, and that's not something that I have any interest in doing, nor do
Yeah.
I intend to. That doesn't mean that I'm curled up in the fetal position 24/7 by any means. It's about integrating it and finding ways to feel connected to my daughter, my sisters, my parents, even though they're no longer here. And one of the ways that I do that is by, having an opportunity to talk about them. Like you said to me, tell me about Dahlia. And that's really meaningful to me.
Mm. It's meaningful to us too because we don't get to meet Dahlia, but we get to meet her through you. And like it's such a gift to see how this one person's life, Dahlia, has now impacted so many others just because you continue to speak about her and talk about her. So if you ever want to send pictures our ways or come on and talk about Dahlia again, we would love to have that.
Oh my God, thank you. I love that. Thank you very much.
Jessica, where can people get your book? Is it on Amazon, like where everybody gets
Yes,
their books,
okay,
or how do
everybody
we do
read my
it?
book. It's called Breathtaking. You can get it. It's actually, if you are listening, well, I don't know when this is going to air. It happens to be on sale right now. It's available in print, audio, and ebook. So however you like to get your books, if you're an Amazon person, you can go on there and get it immediately, or get it at your indie bookstore, your library, wherever you like to get your books.
Wow.
So Breathtaking. And I love connecting with people. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm on social, Instagram and Facebook. You can go to my website, jessicafeinstories.com. And again, it's Fein. I have a TED
Mm.
Talk out. I have lots of articles out. And so, the website's really the hub of all of those things. And listen to my podcast, which is I Don't Know How You Do It.
You guys, I have the best news. If you didn't hear it at the beginning of the episode, Support Spot, our app, is now available for every parent. You no longer need a hospital code to log in. So go ahead, go to childlifeoncall.com/supportspot and download our app today. Hospitals and child life specialists, yes, we are still partnering with you if you want to customize content or provide this app to your families free of charge. We're so grateful that you're here. When you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week. For those of you who are joining us today, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I am a child life specialist. And the suggestions and tips and resources that I talk about with parents on this podcast may be great for you and they may not be right for you. So the most important person you can talk to about getting support is your care team, your doctor who knows your story and your child's story. So regardless of maybe what I mention or what other families mention here, we're not licensed therapists, we're not doctors. We're having a conversation about what the parenting journey has been like. So please keep that in mind as you listen today.